Ronnie belonged to a family of fishermen. After her father mysteriously disappeared, the responsibility of running the household fell upon 13-year-old Ronnie. Her father had gone fishing one day but never returned. The villagers searched for him extensively, but found no trace. Ronnie was bewildered by her father's sudden disappearance and often felt angry at him, but she had no choice but to take care of her family. Her mother remained sick most of the time, leaving Ronnie to manage everything on her own. For generations, her family had been fishing. Ronnie would often accompany her grandfather to the riverbank, where he would narrate countless tales about the river and its fish. Her grandfather always said, "The river reflects what we think and remember." Ronnie never understood these words. She only enjoyed listening to the stories. Now, fishing alone, Ronnie faced challenges from other fishermen who forbade her from fishing in the big river. She had to find another place to fish. Their village was divided into two parts, one with houses and the large river, and the other covered by a dense forest. Rumors whispered of a hidden river deep inside the forest. One day, Ronnie decided to venture into the forest. Carrying her fishing gear, she entered the woods, a place she had never explored. Even in daylight, the forest was dark and eerie, filled with the shrieks of bats and the rustling of snakes. Fear gripped her, but she pressed on. Eventually, she spotted a river and hurried to drink from it. As she bent down, she saw not her own reflection, but the shadow of her father. Startled, she stepped back and screamed. But when she looked again, the shadow had vanished. Convinced it was just her imagination, she prepared to cast her fishing net into the river. As she threw the net, she lost her balance and fell into the water. Ronnie didn't know how to swim and struggled to stay afloat. Just as she was about to climb out, she felt something grabbing her leg from beneath, pulling her back. She kicked frantically, freeing herself, but found no one there. As she stood on the riverbank, a red cloth floated toward her. Her heart sank. It resembled the scarf her father used to wear. Ronnie dismissed it as coincidence and resumed her task. While reaching for bait from her bag, she discovered a photograph of her father inside. Shockingly, she hadn't brought it, and the photo showed her father's eyes scratched out. Terrified, Ronnie decided to leave immediately. As she approached the river to retrieve her net, it began to shake violently. She thought it was full of fish and pulled it out. What emerged left her speechless. Her father's corpse lay entangled in the net. His lifeless eyes stared at her. Ronnie cried out in agony. Suddenly, she felt someone's presence behind her. Fear gripped her as a horrifying figure emerged from the river. A woman with moss-covered hair, long, sharp teeth, a decayed body, and blood smeared across her face. She smiled wickedly at Ronnie as the river's color shifted from blue to red. Screaming, Ronnie fled from the forest and never returned. No one in the village believed her story, but she knew the truth. She was certain that, like her father had encountered the monstrous sea witch in that cursed river. Ronnie eventually overcame the trauma and now earns a living by selling vegetables on a cart. Yet, even today, the nightmares of that dreadful encounter haunt her dreams. Ronnie stood at the entrance of the cave, its jagged mouth resembling the jaws of a monstrous beast. The air around it was cold and heavy, and a faint sound like a low growl echoed from deep within. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to turn back, but the thought of her father's trapped soul pushed her forward. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The walls of the cave were damp and covered with a strange, slimy moss that seemed to pulse under her touch. As she moved deeper, the light from the outside began to fade, leaving her in near darkness. Only a faint, eerie glow emanated from the moss, illuminating the narrow path ahead. Ronnie walked cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the silent cave. Suddenly, she heard a whisper. It was soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, but it grew louder with each step. "Turn back, turn back," the voice hissed. She paused and looked around, but there was no one there. Ignoring the whisper, she continued walking until she reached a large cavern. In the center of the cavern was a pool of dark, still water, and at its heart floated the black pearl, the first task given by the witch. The pearl glowed faintly, casting an ominous light across the cavern. Ronnie knew it wouldn't be easy to retrieve the pearl. She stepped cautiously toward the edge of the pool, but as soon as she did, the water began to ripple. Slowly, a figure emerged from the depths, a creature made entirely of shadow, with eyes that glowed like burning embers. Its form shifted constantly, as if it were made of liquid darkness. "You seek the pearl," the shadow creature said, in a voice that sounded like a chorus of whispers. "But it is not meant for the living." Ronnie's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. "I need it to free my father," she said firmly. The creature moved closer, its glowing eyes locked onto her. "To take the pearl, you must pay a price, a memory, one that is precious to you." Ronnie hesitated. Her memories of her father were the most precious things she had, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. "Take it," she said, her voice trembling. "Take a memory, but give me the pearl." The shadow creature extended a hand toward her, its fingers long and claw-like. It touched her forehead, and a wave of coldness swept over her. For a moment, everything went black. When she opened her eyes again, the creature was gone, and the black pearl lay in her hand. Ronnie felt a strange emptiness in her heart. She couldn't remember the first time her father had taken her fishing. The memory was gone. But she shook off the sadness and clutched the pearl tightly. Returning to the river, she faced the witch once more. The witch smiled, her decayed face twisting in a grotesque expression. "You have succeeded in the first task," she said, "but the second will test your courage even more." Ronnie braced herself. "What do I have to do next?" The witch's eyes gleamed. "You must cross the forest of echoes and retrieve the heart of the ancient tree that lies at its center. But beware. The forest remembers, and it feeds on fear." Without hesitation, Ronnie set off towards the forest of echoes. The trees in this part of the forest were taller and denser, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the sky. As she walked deeper, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to shift and move around her. Every step she took echoed through the forest, but it wasn't just her footsteps she heard. There were other sounds, whispers, murmurs, and distant cries. The forest was alive, and it was watching her. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, turning into voices she recognized. "Ronnie, why did you let me go?" It was her father's voice, filled with pain and sorrow. She spun around, but there was no one there. "Ronnie, you left us," another voice said. This time it was her mother's voice, weak and frail. Ronnie clutched her head, trying to block out the voices. "These are just illusions," she whispered to herself. "The forest is trying to scare me." She pressed on, her determination unwavering. Finally, she reached the center of the forest, where a massive ancient tree stood. Its bark was blackened, and its roots twisted and coiled like serpents. At the base of the tree was a hollow, and inside it pulsed a glowing heart made of crystal. The second task. Ronnie reached out to grab the heart, but as soon as her fingers touched it, the tree came to life. Its branches lashed out like tentacles, wrapping around her arms and legs, pulling her toward its trunk. "No!" Ronnie screamed, struggling against the tree's grip. She could feel its cold bark pressing against her skin, but she refused to give up. Summoning all her strength, she grabbed a sharp stone from the ground and struck the branch holding her. The wood cracked and splintered, and the tree released her with a roar. Wasting no time, she snatched the crystal heart and ran as fast as she could, the forest echoing with the tree's furious cries. Breathing heavily, Ronnie emerged from the forest of echoes and returned to the river. The witch was waiting, her eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. "You have done well, child," the witch said, "but the final task will decide your fate. Are you ready?" Ronnie nodded, though her body was exhausted and her heart was heavy. "I'm ready." The witch's smile widened. "For your final task, you must face the truth that you have been running from. Enter the river, and it will show you what you fear the most." Ronnie's hands trembled as she approached the river. The water, once calm, now churned and bubbled as if it were alive. She took a deep breath and stepped into the water. The moment her feet touched the river, the world around her shifted. She was no longer standing by the river, but in a dark, endless void. In front of her stood her father, his face pale and his eyes hollow. "Why did you leave me, Ronnie?" he asked, his voice echoing in the void. "Why didn't you save me?" Tears filled Ronnie's eyes. "I didn't leave you, Baba. I searched for you. I tried to save you." Her father's form began to twist and change, becoming a monstrous version of himself. His face contorted in anger, his eyes burning with hatred. "You failed me, Ronnie. You let me die." Ronnie fell to her knees, her heart breaking. But then she remembered the lessons her grandfather had taught her. The river reflects what you think and feel. "No," she whispered, her voice growing stronger. "This isn't real. This is my fear talking. I didn't fail you, Baba. I fought for you. I'm still fighting for you." The monstrous figure began to dissolve, the darkness around her fading. The void transformed into a peaceful riverbank, and her father's true form appeared, smiling softly. "I'm proud of you, Ronnie," he said gently. "You have freed me." Ronnie reached out, but before she could touch him, he faded into the light. She opened her eyes and found herself back by the river, the witch nowhere to be seen. The river, once cursed and dark, now flowed clear and calm. Ronnie had conquered her fears, freed her father's soul, and broken the curse of the witch. With a heavy but peaceful heart, Ronnie returned to her village, ready to start anew. The nightmares no longer haunted her. She had faced the darkness and won.